Welcome to the C Files. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to do a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell notification and share this information if you believe it to be beneficial. There are two things you're going to need to understand today's world: the Bible and history. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about history, and I'm going to be in this book, The Conspirator's Hierarchy, Committee of 300 by Dr. John Coleman. And this one, Tavistock Institute, Social Engineering the Masses by Daniel Estulin. And I'm going to run through some things that I've learned. I've got other books. I've got straight regular history books back here. I've studied it a lot. And there's a lot of history that people don't understand and don't know. And I'll tell you right now, there's a mass number of people, not only in our society, but across the world, who have been mind-controlled and manipulated mentally. In essence, a mild form of brainwashing. And they believe whatever's put out on the social media, I might say the mainstream media, the main channels of the news. They believe whatever's put out because, it's the official news. And all they understand through mass media, through certain music, through their government education, is that which certain powers to be, certain very rich and powerful families want them to understand and want them to think. Now, there are the rare individuals that break away from that, and they begin to understand that they've been lied to, and they've been manipulated and controlled by these forms of media manipulation. Now, I'm going to go back to the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, or even as far back as the 1700s, but I'll take it to the 1800s, the British East India Company and the Royal Institute of International Affairs was heavily involved in two things: human trafficking, otherwise known as slavery, both African and East Asian. They were the ones who brought the Chinese over to build the railroads in the West. And the drug trade, mainly heroin, from the opium. So they were shipping that to England. They were shipping it to America. They were shipping it they were affecting India heavily with it. Millions of addicts. And, the way they would take in the heroin sometimes was different than the way it's done today. But eventually the way it's done today was the method that was determined. And it was a cash cow. It was a cash cow. And so these families that are so prominent, along with the royal aspect of England, made fortunes off of the drug trade, much like what's happening with the drug trade out of South America, Central America today. But their fortunes are minuscule next to what was happening with these prominent English families. And so Eventually, they set up banks to hide the money or to hoard the money or to use the money for other enterprises. And so, eventually, as we fast forward, they got into the diamond trade. They started hoarding diamonds out of countries around the world. Then the diamond trade became very lucrative for them, very lucrative. They were still basically, in my view, stealing diamonds from countries and leaving those countries poor and destitute. These were very greedy, very evil people that were doing this. And they controlled international banks and so forth. Now, this is only a fraction of the story, but it's a fraction that I want to focus on in this particular video. Now, when the diamond strike hit, kind of like the gold rush of the 1890s, I guess it was, 1800s in the West, or 49ers, 1849, they call them the 49ers. Anyway, the diamond trade began to, well, the collecting of the diamonds began to dry up because they had basically dug up all the diamonds and taken them from these countries and left them poor. Except for in Africa. They discovered a cash cow in Africa, in South Africa. And this resulted eventually in what was called the Anglo-Boer War. Now, the Boers were the farmers of South Africa. They needed to get their land basically to dig for the diamonds and all of that. And so they had a strategy. And I want to read to you that strategy. How did the British Crown's secret agents succeed in pulling off the Boer War, a stunning fraud of such gigantic proportion? To accomplish the Herculean task required skilled organizing, with devoted agents in place to carry out the daily instructions passed down from the conspirators' hierarchy. The first step was a press propaganda campaign portraying the Boers as uncivilized barbarians, dirty and lazy, only slightly human, who were denying British citizens the right to vote in the Boer republics of the Transvaal and the Orange Free State, which today we call South Africa. This was followed by a barrage of demands by the Boers that could not be met. Not by the Boers, followed by a barrage of demands on the Boers, which could not be met. The principal demand was that the blacks and outlanders, foreigners, be given the vote. Does that sound familiar? When Paul Kruger rejected the impossible British demands, he was portrayed in the British press as a heartless tyrant. But the president of the Transvaal Republic could not possibly accede to demands calling for the vote for blacks and foreigners, who outnumbered the Boer population 3-1. After that, a series of incidents were staged to provoke the Boers into retaliation, but that didn't work. Then followed the infamous Jameson raid, I meant to say, where a certain Dr. Starr Jameson led a party of several hundred armed men in an attack on the Transvaal. War followed immediately thereafter, exactly as planned by the British government. Queen Victoria mounted the largest and best equipped army the world had seen to that time. Since the Boers had no standing army and no trained militia, they were not expected to be a match for Victoria's 400,000 soldiers, drawn from the ranks of Britain's underclasses and led by her finest officers. The British press declared that the war would be of very short duration. Rudyard Kipling also believed that the war would be over in a week or two, never numbering more than 80,000. The Boer farmers were given no chance. Instead, with rifle in one hand and the Bible in the other, the Boers fought the British to a standstill for 3 years. It wasn't just the American Revolution that did that to them. It happened to them in Africa as well. Quote, "We went to South Africa thinking the war would be over in a week," said Kipling. "Instead, the Boers taught us no end of a lesson." That same, quote, lesson could be taught to the Committee of 300 today if we could but muster 80,000 leaders, good men and true, to lead this nation in battle against the gargantuan monster threatening to devour everything the U.S. Constitution stands for. After the war ended in 1902, the British Crown had to consolidate its grip on the fortune of gold and diamonds that lay beneath the barren veldt of the Boer republics of the Transvaal and Orange Free State. This was done through the Round Table, an organization which took its name from the legend of King Arthur and his knights. The Round Table is strictly a British MI6 intelligence operation established by the Committee of 300, which, together with the Rhodes Scholarship Program, was a dagger in the heartland of South Africa, even as it is today in America. The Round Table was established in South Africa by Rothschild agent Cecil Rhodes and funded by the English brand of the Rothschild family. Its purpose was to train business leaders loyal to the crown, who would secure the vast gold and diamond treasures for the British ruling hierarchy. South Africans had their birthright stolen from them in a coup so massive and all-pervading, it was apparent that only a central unified command could have pulled it off. That unified command was the Committee of 300. That this was accomplished is not in dispute. By the early 1920s, the 300, through the Rothschilds, had a stronghold on the biggest gold and diamond fields in the world. Now the Committee of 300 had at its disposal both the vast fortune coming from the drug trade and the equally vast fortune of the minerals and metals wealth of South Africa. Financial control of the world was all but complete. Now let me go into the Tavistock Institute. Let's talk about what drugs are being used to do. To understand the roots of this charade, Jeffrey Steinberg of the Executive Intelligence Review suggests that it is necessary to go back to the immediate post-war period, when there was a concerted effort launched by the Frankfurt School and the London Tavistock Institute to use the Marxist Freudian perversion of psychology and other social sciences as instruments of mass social control and brainwashing. The two pillars of the assault on the American intellectual tradition was cybernetics and the drug counterculture. Drug counterculture was precisely the weapon that the Frankfurt School and their fellow travelers employed over the next 50 years to create a cultural paradigm shift away from the so-called authoritarian matrix of man in the living image of God and the superiority of the Republican form of nation-state over all other forms of political organization. They transformed American culture toward an erotic, perverse matrix associated with the present politically correct tyranny of tolerance for dehumanizing drug abuse, sexual perversion, and the glorification of violence. For the Marxist Freudian revolutionaries of the Frankfurt School, the ultimate antidote to the hated Western Judeo-Christian civilization was to tear that civilization down from the inside by turning out generations of necrophiliacs. We just had another school shooting just yesterday, Georgia. 4 people lost their lives. 2 teachers, 2 students. According to the mainstream media, it was a 14-year-old doing the shooting. The question I have, and I don't know the answer yet, is, was that student under psychiatric care? Was that student on psychiatric drugs? How much media did that student watch? What were the influences in that student's life that altered his mind to do, or her mind, I don't know if it was male or female anyway, to do what they did? We have, for a very long time, for 100 years, thrown our children to the wolves, called government education. And we've allowed the wolves to devour them. Some survive. I did, because I didn't buy into what the wolves were selling. I bucked the system. I kicked back. Some of the smartest kids in school are the ones that create the most problems in school. You know why? Because they think differently. They're not conforming to the conformity that the school requires, which is Tavistock Institute style mind manipulation and control. heavy stuff, huh? It's not what you normally hear on YouTube. It's not what you normally see on these platforms, because most of it is just trivial garbage and nonsense. The vast majority of it is. These videos, they won't get millions of hits. Because only the few will figure it out, and only the few will understand what they'll have to do to avoid the manipulation and mind control of society. And when they do, they'll be deemed the rebels, the nonconformist, and they'll be called names and condemned. They'll be called extremist. They'll be called conspiracy theorist. They will be the folks that just don't seem to fit in to our society. But they're also the folks that look at our society and realize that it is filled with sin and iniquity and mind control techniques and lies and deception, and they won't buy into any of that. Food for thought. God bless, folks. Thank you, by the way, for the thumbs ups, the comments, the discussions in the comment section. Regardless if you agree with me or not, or if you agree with each other or not, discourse is healthy. It's important. And even if you hate my guts and disagree with me, please make your argument. We need it. We need your perspective. We need to understand how you think and why you think what you think, because it's important. Because one thing that's happening in our society, including the universities, is the death of civil discourse, where we can sit down and disagree with each other and yet still learn from each other and make our society better than it was the day before. That's what they hate. That's what they don't want. That's why they keep attacking free speech. That's why they keep, having these incidents that occur right around election time so they can manipulate your mind as they feed you the narrative they want you to have after a critical incident, which creates high emotions, and that high emotion gives them an avenue in which they can bypass your reasoning mind and go to your emotional mind and manipulate you to believe certain things and to support certain things. And that's how they manipulate and control you. We'll leave it there. I'll have more. Tomorrow I'm going to do another one on the book of Hebrews. We're in Hebrews chapter 10. And more on the New Testament or the New Covenant and what it means to be in the New Covenant. Thanks for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time on the C-Files.